Welcome back to Heart of Poland. We are in the second half of our top 10 best moments of Heart of Poland. We are celebrating our first birthday. We've got an action-packed episode ahead of you where we're going to go from number 5 to the number 1 best ever episode of Heart of Poland, at least according to me. And number 5, my episode recently released with Dr. Alexandra Ritchie about the life, incredible life, of Władysław Bartoszewski. Now it just so happens that she is actually not only one of Poland's foremost English language historians, but also happened to be Władysław Bartoszewski's daughter-in-law. So living and working with him for so many years, she had a very intimate knowledge of Władysław Bartoszewski's life, which was quite phenomenal. And as I got to learn the story, I was really quite amazed by how little I knew about him and also how little there was in English, frankly speaking, about this incredible guy who'd been in Auschwitz, had managed to be released from Auschwitz, and had then gone on to have this life full of colour, full of drama, full of adventure, full of self-sacrifice for Poland. So Dr. Ritchie, Alex, as she insisted I call her, it took me a long time to be able to get that interview together for various reasons. I was waiting for almost a year for the moment where we could sit down. And as I was sitting opposite her, I was really just struck by the incredible attention to detail and the manner with which she described these stories. It was as if I was sitting with Władysław Bartoszewski across the table. And she described the moment when, as an 18-year-old boy, he's caught up in a roundup which will change his life forever.
The Germans decided that they were going to do a roundup, arresting all men between the age of 16 and 60 in that area, and he was caught in this roundup. The Germans came to their flat and sort of banged on the door and took him.
And what did he tell you that was like? I mean, it must have just been terrible
Terrifying,
fear.
terrifying.
He's 18 years old.
18 years old. And they were brought to a kind of stables in Łazienki Park. They were made to sit there for 2 days. Nobody knew what was going on. They weren't allowed to speak. They were kept on the ground where the hay and horse dung and so on was, and then put on a train. And then the classic story, trying to see where they were going. They thought they were going to Częstochowa. They thought they were maybe going to a work camp. Interestingly enough, Witold Pilecki was also on the same train. They didn't know each other at that point, but and brought to Auschwitz. The train doors open and it's a rouse, and the German Shepherd dogs and people being beaten and then seeing the Arbeit macht frei sign and then being expected to line up on the Appellplatz and being told by the commandant that the only way out was going to be through the crematorium chimney. So as an 18-year-old by himself, he was absolutely petrified, and the experience at Auschwitz, completely changed his life and his outlook on life.
Yeah, I think, how can you hear this story and not think of yourself as an 18-year-old and think about the kind of person you were then, and then think about the experience that Władysław Bartoszewski and so many other people went through? And I just felt this tremendous honour, frankly, to be speaking to somebody so intelligent, so erudite, but also somebody who was able to communicate the story in such a fantastic way. But the standout moment for me was not that part. It was actually a little bit later on when I asked Alex what it was like knowing this incredible Pole.
He was always very funny and would make comments about what they looked like or whatever. Just a lovely man. So if in our private life, we didn't sort of think about the fact that he was this hugely famous and amazing and person who'd been in Auschwitz or whatever. It was just fun to be around him and talk. And he loved talking about history and politics, but family as well.
I called it happenstance at the start. It certainly was quite good from a historian's point of view that you landed in that particular place.
Yes. I mean, it was a complete fluke, as I said. I had no intention or idea about who he was when I met my husband at Oxford, but he turned out to be a hugely important part of my life for over 30 years. He was a very, very close friend and a very important mentor and a person I loved deeply and I miss terribly. It was just a very, very important part of my life, particularly as I came to live in Poland and was far away from my own family. So he became very much more than, a sort of figurehead. He was very, very much a part of my day-to-day life.
Now you can probably see that actually Alex was a bit emotional there, and Władysław Bartoszewski just passed away relatively recently, a few years ago. I became emotional as well because I sat opposite her and really again saw something that was a bit more than the official story. It was about the relationship she had had with him. And again, I felt this sense as a journalist, as a creator, just a privilege to be able to try and get that story across to you, the viewer, because there's always more of a story than meets the eye. And that's what we've been trying to get to with the Heart of Poland show. At number 4, one of our best ever episodes, Sea of Candles and Memories. So the 1st of November, All Souls Day, is a super important day in the Polish calendar. And for the first time ever, thanks to the Heart of Poland show, I was able to go to the Powązki Military Cemetery, which is just this incredible place, like every Polish cemetery is on the 1st of November, and just watch people go about their business and pay honour and respect to the loved ones they've left behind on this important day for the Polish nation and obviously for the Polish history as well. And we came across this father who, for me, I think just so eloquently spoke great English. If I remember, they'd actually come across from England for this particular day, and he'd come here with his children to show them about what this day means to them and also to teach them about Polish history. Let's hear from him right now.
Why is All Saints' Day so important in Polish history and Polish culture and today? What does it mean for you?
I think it's mainly down to the fact that we're a very religious nation by nature, and this is the day where we remember, commemorate our lost ones, but also our fallen heroes. And this is really ground zero as far as Polish martyrdom is concerned, right?
Okay, so tell me about some of the graves you've been visiting with your family today.
We've really just arrived, so this was our first point where we wanted to go. But we'll definitely be visiting the Smolensk Memorial and other military graves of the young scouts that fell in the Second World War. The Home Army quarter, the National Armed Forces quarter. So we'll definitely be visiting those places because for us it's, we just can't imagine ourselves being anywhere else today, right? This is like a life history lesson for them.
And is it important to you that your children accompany with you as you go to the graves of the people in your family and the people, your loved ones as well?
Yeah, because this is the best opportunity to basically tell them the stories, just to make them aware of our history, make them aware of the sacrifice that this nation had to bear to achieve its freedom.
Now, I loved what that man said because, you know what, history really matters in Poland for obvious reasons. It's had such an effect on the country as it is today. And I can understand sometimes when people say that they want to kind of move on now and look towards the future. I can empathise with that. But what I've always tried to do with the history episodes of the Heart of Poland is just try and get across the experience that the Polish nation went through. And the best way I've always been able to do that is by showing the way that people today try and communicate that story to their children. It's an example for me. And in a world in which patriotism can sometimes be confused with other isms and maybe seem a little bit outdated, the strength and the depth of the Polish connection to the past is hugely admirable. And we really just nailed that with this particular episode. It's very, very moving, and I of course recommend that you watch the rest of it. At number 3, now I'm not going to lie to you, as a journalist, as a film creator, sometimes one of the best things about your job can be talking to the people who you admire. And Anya Calkins was just somebody I've watched on television for a long time, so you kind of get excited when you interview someone that you see on TV. You know, inevitably they start to become, they start to become a kind of icon. Maybe is too strong a word, but certainly a role model. And I've always admired her because I think she just has quite the right tone as a journalist and as a TV presenter. So I invited her on the show, And for me, one of the programs I like best is a BBC program called Desert Island Discs, where you go really long form in someone's history. But what you need from your guests is, of course, a bit of honesty. Well, Anya Kalczynska turned up, and to her credit, she had a lot on her plate, but she still turned up. And she was just so honest and so open. And I talked to her about some of the difficult moments she's had in her career, including the moment when she had to go and cover the Paris terror attacks and how that impacted her. And you could really tell that she was talking from the heart.
Yes, in France it was very difficult because we were at the heart of the events. I remember we were just sitting in the restaurant and hearing the ambulances going on. And we immediately thought that something could have happened. And then we realized what happened. And then, you know, you're just putting on a different mode. You're just running and you take your cameraman. You just think of the batteries. Are there enough batteries? Are we having the phones on? And just trying to talk to people. It's different. You have your accreditation, your cards with you, so you're like a different person, and you're immune.
And when you go home, when maybe you're
with
your children?
When you go home, you cry. And I remember this moment very well. I remember I was just sitting at the airport, and we were entering the airplane, Charles de Gaulle, and I remember that very well. I was sitting next to a window so that no one can see me, and I was just crying because all those emotions just left, and I knew that I would be safely home soon. I just spoke to my kids, to my husband. They all knew that it's fine, and I could just let it go. So you let it go. You cry. You need to.
Yeah, Anya Kalczynska's right. I've experienced maybe not quite the same moment, but when you work in Polish history and when you look at the terrible things that have happened to this country, you can be both appalled but also inspired. And somehow it creeps inside you and it takes its emotional drain. And do you know what? Before I'd ever become a journalist or ever worked in films, I hadn't quite understood about how it's an artistic process, how much it leaves an imprint on you as a person. And if you look at her body language and the way she's saying that, you can see that cost her something. She's a tremendous person, she really is, and that whole interview is just a fascinating look into a fascinating person's life, which is what Heart of Poland has always been about. Okay, I'm sure you're getting nervous now. I'm pleased to reveal that the second best episode, in my opinion, for Heart of Poland for the last year was with historian and author Adam Zamoyski. Now, Adam Zamoyski is this extraordinary character, and as a reader of some of his many, many books, I was very keen to interview him for the Heart of Poland viewers, just like you. Now, Adam Zamoyski doesn't really do a huge amount of interviews, but somehow I managed to convince him. I'm still not entirely sure how. And he turned up and he's this really quite extraordinary character. Now, I'd done a lot of homework on Adam Zamoyski's life, but I did make quite a fundamental error. And your mother was also a countess, I believe.
Well, no, actually, she was a princess. She was born at Czartoryska.
Yeah, I can tell you now, that was quite awkward. I felt slightly embarrassed because I'd obviously got my information wrong. And I think he was slightly embarrassed because he didn't really want to correct me on that point. But indeed, Adam Zamoyski's mother is a princess. And it was just so incredible to be able to speak to this person with this direct connection to Polish history. And I always kind of trot that line out. But you know what? It was a really, really interesting interview. And we went into some, I would say, difficult subjects. And what Adam Zamoyski talked to me about, one of the subjects which fascinated me most, was the way he presented the way he thinks Polish history should be shown to the outside world. This is a subject which fascinates me and fascinates a lot of people in Poland.
When you ask me, you meet me in the street and you say, "Hi, how are you?" And I start saying, well, you know, I've got chilblains and I've got a bit of arthritis in my leg and actually I've got a headache. You don't really want to hear that and you lose interest. Whereas if I tell you, well, actually, you know, I've just done this and I've done that, and so you're interested. And I can tell you about the arthritis and the chilblains later. And so rather than dwelling on the fact that more Poles were slaughtered in the Second World War than anybody else, and that we suffered more and more things, which immediately make people feel uneasy. One should actually start with the positive things, with the things that are at least interesting and fun, and then you can bring on the other stuff. And by then, people will listen to the sad story because they already sympathize with, as it were, the hero of the story, the main character. Whereas if you just sort of, you see a tramp in the street lying there, in his vomit, you're not going to say this man's story is very interesting and get a lot of people interested. But, if you start telling the story of a bright young man who marries a beautiful girl and then she gets killed in a car crash or she dies of cancer and he goes downhill and takes to drugs or something, and then you go on to that, you can begin to bring them in. It's a very simple, it's normal in a way.
The way that Adam presented that there really did stay with me for a long time. And I'm somebody basically who really should be listening to what he said. But I have to admit, I hadn't. Sometimes you can go into this spiral of thought and it's hard to see yourself as others see you. And Adam Zamoyski just gave this fantastic perspective on the subject of how we talk and remember Poland's history. It stayed with me for a long time. But longer still has stayed with me this particular excerpt from that interview where he talks about Polish-Jewish relations in a way that, frankly speaking, I found a little bit uncomfortable, but I think was so important.
It's a human relationship gone wrong. In most countries, there wasn't anything you could possibly define as a relationship. If there was a Jewish community, very often there wasn't a community, there were Jews around the place, and yes, there was anti-Semitism everywhere, but it wasn't an issue. Now in Poland there was this huge community, and there was a Jewish community, and there was the Polish nation, and there was a relationship between the two which lasted 800 years, and that relationship was blown apart with the partitions because in each of the partitions a third element came into it, i.e. the new power. And both sides felt betrayed by the other. And, it's a bit like when a love affair goes wrong. There can never be or a marriage breaks up, there can never be an easy divorce or a dispassionate divorce. There are always terrible blame games, and in this case, it's okay. The metaphor may be a bit stark, but that is what has happened. Is that two communities that lived together for centuries, and okay, it wasn't always rosy, but it was not too bad. And frankly, it was amazing that they lived so harmoniously together for so long, given what happened in every other country. And then it all got blown apart. And what happened in these lands between really in the 1930s and the 1950s, not to mention then the communist, the next decades, was so frightful, so dehumanizing, so morally discombobulating, and people lost their moral compasses there on both sides, and people in every community behaved, some unbelievably badly and some unbelievably heroically. And to wade into this and start blaming people or accusing people is pointless and ahistorical and just idiotic.
I really got the sense here we were talking to somebody who very considered thinking about Poland, Polish history, Polish relations with other countries, somebody with really quite a unique perspective. And again, as I say, doesn't give that many interviews. We were pretty lucky to sit down with him, so I highly recommend that episode. And now, at number one, the absolute best Heart of Poland episode, if you ask me, it's an entirely subjective opinion. I offer you the two-part series that we did with Australian author and travel writer Michael Moran. We went and looked at the life and times of young Chopin. And this is a subject that he's fascinated by. Michael himself is a very interesting man, and I could have easily put our interview with him about his life as an author and his book Country in the Moon on this list, but I decided to focus on these episodes with Chopin because, again, we're doing something that a lot of people have tried to do but not done particularly well. We were able to show Michael's expertise. We travelled around Warsaw together looking at a young Chopin's life, and this two-part series, in my opinion, is the best thing we've ever done. There was a particular moment with the name of a church where Michael had to try a couple of times before we quite got it right. Let's watch that now.
Augsburg Evangelical Church of the Holy Trinity.
So the whole episode is absolutely fantastic, and as we were going around Warsaw, Michael takes me to this statue, very famous statue in the Royal Radziewicz Park. And it's a beautiful willowing thing, and he's talking about it. And we go up, and Michael actually tells me the story about what happens to this statue.
We've got this inscription here, and it says, what is this? It says that the statue of Frederick Chopin that was destroyed and stolen by the Germans in the 31st of May 1940 has been rebuilt by the whole nation, and that's in 1946. So what happened?
Well, they saw Chopin as a subversive political power, which he had been always, since he started composing polonaises. Everyone regarded him, even in the 19th century, as having a political function. And in many of his works, he included subversive military-type songs and songs that encouraged people to be together. To rebuild this memorial, they had to try and, they could hardly do it from photographs, but they actually found a miniature of the original casting, and they were able to reconstruct this. The story is a bit more involved than that, but it's a very interesting story, really, and actually very symbolic, I think. Very symbolic.
I imagine if you were an inhabitant of Warsaw, then knowing that Poland's composer had been destroyed here, it must have had such an effect on your morale, because this is such a symbol of Poland, and the Germans, of course, knew that.
But that's the difference between Chopin and any other composer of any other nation. He has a function in Polish psyche that is absolutely unique in any country in the world for a composer. I mean, even Tchaikovsky to the Russians doesn't have this type of multifaceted significance.
And as I'm standing there listening to him, I'm thinking, wow, I feel such an honour that I'm standing with someone who's so good at what he does and so knowledgeable as Michael. But the line that he used when we were sitting in the Chopin Museum just completely blew me away.
For me, this has always been a symbol of Polish history. Construction, destruction, reconstruction.
Construction, destruction, reconstruction. As I always say to my guests, I literally couldn't have put it better myself. What a pleasure and honour it was to sit down with so knowledgeable a man as Michael Moran and find out about Chopin. Now, throughout the series that we've done, this whole year that we spent at Heart of Poland, we've always tried to offer an in-depth, high-quality look at the heart of Poland. Have I been successful in my mission to uncover the true heart of Poland? The answer is no, because as I've always been telling you, it's an impossible mission. But don't worry. We'll keep on trying. So if you've liked this, I highly recommend every episode, but particularly the 10 that we presented over this two-part series. Please join us now by letting us know what your favourite episode was from the Heart of Poland. And if you haven't watched any of the episodes that I've shown, make sure you go and check out the First News on any channel where you can find it. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you name it, and the website. I'll see you again for the next show and the next year of Heart of Poland.